The Wyoming wind cut straight to the bone, a razor-edged howl that promised death. It was in that biting cold that Matilda Bishop, clinging to the last remnants of her father's failed ranch, heard the wolves. But this was no ordinary hunt. It was a frenzied slaughter. She found him in a clearing, a silent drifter surrounded by the corpses of 3 massive timber wolves. He was torn open, bleeding out on the snow, but his eyes were alive, burning with a silent, calculating fire. She saved a man from death that day, never imagining she had just rescued the secret general of 10,000 warriors. The land around Red Dead Canyon was a harsh, unforgiving master. It demanded everything, sweat, blood, and sanity, and gave back only rock and wind. Matilda Bishop knew this better than anyone. She was the sole inheritor of what the townsfolk in Redemption Creek called Bishop's Folly, a 2,000-acre spread of high desert scrub and badlands that had broken her father's heart and then his body. At 24, she was lean and weathered, her hand scarred from mending barbed wire in the freezing cold, and her eyes holding the quiet resignation of someone who expects the worst. This morning, the worst had come calling. A norther had blown in overnight, dumping a foot of fresh powder and plunging the temperature into single digits. Her horse, a grizzled old Mustang named Gus, protested every step, his breath pluming in the icy air. Matilda was checking the few traps she'd set along the ridgeline, hoping for a fox or a coyote. The pelts were all that stood between her and total foreclosure, a fact Bartholomew Shaw, the valley's resident land baron, reminded her of weekly. She was dismounted, kneeling to inspect a trap sprung by a savvy raccoon that had stolen the bait and left a single, mocking toe print when the sound reached her. It wasn't the yip of a lone coyote. It was the full-throated, snarling chaos of a wolf pack in a frenzy. It was close. Too close. Matilda grabbed her Winchester 73 from Gus's saddle scabbard. She wasn't a hero, just a survivor. Her first instinct was to mount up and ride the other way. But beneath the snarling, she heard something else, a low, guttural grunt that wasn't animal. It was human. She crept through the snow-laden pines, her rifle at the ready. The clearing was a horrific sight. The snow was churned and stained crimson. 3 massive timber wolves, each over 100 pounds, lay dead or dying. One had its skull caved in, another a brutal gash across its throat. The third was still twitching, a hunting knife, a heavy, dark steel bowie, buried to the hilt in its chest. And in the center of the carnage was the man. He was propped against a boulder, half naked despite the cold, his clothes torn to shreds. He was a drifter, clearly, but built like a bull. His skin was a deep bronze, his hair a matted black mane. But it was the wounds that made Matilda's stomach clench. His chest and arms were a geography of deep, tearing bites. His left leg was savaged, the bone likely visible beneath the gore. Worst of all was the wound on his throat, a deep, ragged tear that seemed to pulse with every shallow breath. He was alive. Barely. As she stepped into the clearing, his head snapped up. His eyes met hers. They were not the panicked eyes of a dying man. They were dark, assessing, and utterly silent. He didn't ask for help. He didn't moan. He just watched her, his one good hand still gripping the boulder, his knuckles white. "Lord preserve us," Matilda whispered, the words stolen by the wind. He had killed 3 wolves with nothing but a knife. He was dying, yet he looked at her not as a savior, but as the next potential threat. Matilda was a practical woman. This man was a dead weight. Bringing him back to her ranch was suicide. He would either die of infection or slow her down enough for the rest of the pack, which was surely nearby, to find them both. And if he did live, what then? He was a stranger, and a dangerous-looking one at that. She should have turned around. She should have saved herself. But then the man's eyes flickered. Not at her, but past her. A low growl echoed from the trees behind her. The rest of the pack. The man slowly, agonizingly, tried to pull his knife from the dead wolf's ribs. He was going to fight them. He was going to fight the entire pack, half dead, from a seated position. "You stubborn fool," Matilda spat, the words a mix of fear and sheer, dumbfounded respect. She raised her Winchester and fired a shot over the man's head, into the pines. The bullet's crack and the ricochet's whine sent the hidden wolves scattering. It was a temporary reprieve. The man's eyes locked back onto hers. The calculation was gone, replaced by a flicker of something. Surprise. "All right," Matilda said, her own voice shaky. "Looks like you're my problem now." She jammed her rifle back into the scabbard. "If you die on the way, I'm leaving you. Understand?" The man said nothing. He didn't even nod. He just watched her as she brought Gus closer, her mind racing, trying to figure out how to lift a 200-pound, half-dead man onto a saddle when she was half-frozen herself. It would be a long, bloody ride back to Bishop's Folly. Getting the drifter back to the ranch was a new kind of hell. He was a dead weight, unconscious for most of the ride, and Matilda had to tie him to the saddle and lead Gus on foot. Every step was a battle against the rising snowdrifts and the biting wind. By the time she reached her small, wind-battered cabin, she was exhausted, and her fingers were numb. She dragged him inside and onto the worn rug in front of the hearth. She couldn't lift him onto her bed. For 3 days, he was a ghost, lost in a fevered haze. Matilda did what she could. She'd seen her father die of pneumonia and her mother of consumption. She was no stranger to the sick room. She stitched his wounds with the coarse thread she used for mending feed sacks, boiling the needle first. The gash on his throat was the worst. It was deep, and she feared she was only closing the skin over an infection that would poison him from within. She cleaned the wolf bites with the last of her whiskey, a sacrifice that pained her, and packed them with a poultice of yarrow and sage. Through it all, he remained silent. Not a groan, not a whisper. The only sound he made was the ragged, shallow breath that whistled through the bandages on his throat. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Matilda was asleep in her rocking chair, a shotgun across her lap, when she woke to the sound of wood splitting. Her eyes snapped open. He was gone from the hearth. She grabbed the shotgun and burst out the cabin door. He was by the woodpile, his chest and throat still wrapped in her blood-stained linen bandages. He was wearing her father's old oversized coat. He held her axe in one hand, balanced perfectly, as he methodically split logs and stacked them by the door. He was pale and moved with a stiff-legged gait from the mauling, but he was working. "What in God's name are you doing?" Matilda demanded, lowering the shotgun. He stopped, mid-swing. He looked at her. Then at the axe. Then at the small, neat pile of wood. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug, as if to say, it needed to be done. He didn't speak. She wasn't even sure he could. The wolf's fang had torn straight across his larynx. She started calling him Jonah, after the biblical prophet who had been swallowed by a whale and spat back out. This man had been swallowed by a pack of wolves and spat back onto her doorstep. A week passed. A strange, silent routine developed. Jonah, as she now thought of him, was a tireless worker. He healed at a rate that was almost unnatural. He mended the section of fence Gentry's men had cut, reinforced the sagging roof of the barn, and reshod Gus. His work was meticulous, precise. He was a carpenter, a blacksmith, and a laborer all in one. and he was always watching. He never made a sound, moving with a predator's grace, but his eyes missed nothing. He'd watch the ridge lines for hours, his gaze sweeping the horizon. He seemed to be listening for something she couldn't hear. The silence between them was heavy, but not, to her surprise, uncomfortable. It was a shared quiet, a partnership of necessity. She'd talk to him sometimes, filling the emptiness with her own worries. "Shaw's running out of patience," she said one evening, cleaning her rifle while Jonah sharpened her knives. "He wants this land. Says the railroad is planning a spur line through the canyon. He's lying. He just wants the water rights to my spring. He wants to own the whole valley." Jonah paused his work, the whetstones shing, shing, shing stopping. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "He'll send Gentry soon," she continued, her voice bitter. "Floyd Gentry, a pig of a man who enjoys his work too much." Jonah went back to the knife. The sound was faster now, sharper. He was right. Gentry arrived 2 days later. He didn't come alone. He brought 4 of Shaw's hired guns with him. They rode right up to the porch, their horses tearing up her yard. "Matilda!" Gentry sneered. He was a big man, with a belly that spilled over his gun belt and small, cruel eyes. "Mr. Shaw is tired of waiting. He sent me with a final offer, $500 for the whole spread. Cash." "It's worth $5,000, and you know it, Floyd," Matilda said, stepping onto the porch. She kept her hands visible, away from the pistol she had tucked into her waistband. "It's worth what Mr. Shaw says it's worth," Gentry said, spitting a brown stream of tobacco juice near her boot. "You're all alone out here. A fire could start. Easy. Or rustlers. A woman can't manage a place like this. I've managed just fine." "Have you?" Gentry's eyes slid past her, to the cabin door. Jonah was standing there, silent as a shadow. He was just watching, his hands empty at his sides. Gentry laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Well, look at this. You've gone and found yourself a pet. What's this, Matilda? Some half-breed stray? He do tricks?" "He's a guest," Matilda said, her voice dropping. "You'll leave him be." "I'll leave him be." Gentry swung down from his horse. He swaggered onto the porch, his spurs ringing. He was inches from Jonah, who hadn't moved a muscle. "This is what's giving you your spine, ain't it? Think this mute savage can protect you?" Gentry shoved Jonah hard in the chest. "Go on, boy. Fetch my horse some water." It happened faster than Matilda could blink. Jonah didn't strike. He didn't punch. He moved. His left hand shot out and seized Gentry's wrist. His right hand clamped onto Gentry's shoulder. With a sickening sound of displaced bone and a twist of his entire body, Jonah threw the 250-pound man. Gentry flew off the porch, his shoulder joint popping, and crashed into the horse trough, shattering the winter ice and landing with a pained howl. The other 4 men grabbed for their guns. Jonah was already holding the axe from the woodpile. He hadn't been holding it a second before. He didn't raise it. He just held it, balanced, and looked at the 4 men. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Gentry screamed, clutching his dislocated shoulder. "You broke it! You savage, you broke my arm!" "Get off my land, Floyd," Matilda said, her hand now resting on her pistol. The 4 gunmen looked at each other. They were paid to bully a lone woman, not to fight a silent demon with an axe who had just disabled their boss without breaking a sweat. "This ain't over," Gentry gurgled, hauling himself out of the trough. "Shaw will hear about this. He'll bring the law. He'll bring everyone." They rode off. Gentry slumped in his saddle, cradling his ruined arm. Matilda turned to Jonah, her heart hammering. He was still holding the axe. He looked at the retreating riders, then at her. He set the axe down gently by the woodpile. You should have killed him," Matilda whispered, shocked at her own words. Jonah looked at her. He touched the heavy bandages on his throat. He shook his head, a single, sharp gesture. It was clear what he meant. It wasn't time. The confrontation with Gentry changed things. The air on the ranch was no longer still. It was charged, humming with the anticipation of the next, more violent confrontation. Shaw was a patient man, but he was also proud. Gentry's humiliation would demand a response. Worse, they were running low on essentials. The larder was nearly bare, and Matilda needed rock salt for curing, more ammunition, and most importantly, laudanum and clean bandages for Jonah's wounds. "I have to go to town," she announced a day later. "Redemption Creek." Jonah just nodded, then pulled on her father's coat and grabbed the shotgun. "No," she said. "You can't. You saw Gentry. They'll be looking for you. They'll have the sheriff with them." He gave her a look that was almost patronizing. It was the same look he'd given her when she'd tried to set a broken fence post in soft mud. He gestured to her, then to the ranch, then to the horizon. "You are not safe alone." She argued for 10 minutes. It was like arguing with a mountain. He was coming. Redemption Creek wasn't much of a town. It was one dusty main street, lined with false-fronted buildings, bracketed by a church at one end and a saloon at the other. It was a town that served the ranchers and prospectors, which meant it was a town Bartholomew Shaw effectively owned. They rode in on Gus, Matilda in the saddle, and Jonah walking beside the horse, the shotgun held loosely in his hands. Every eye on the street turned to them. Men stopped whittling on the boardwalk. Women peered through the curtains of the dry goods store. They saw Matilda Bishop, the stubborn recluse, and the terrifying-looking stranger at her side. "Keep your head down," Matilda muttered. "We go to Peterson's, then the assayer's office for the laudanum, and we get out." He said nothing, his eyes sweeping the rooftops, the alleys, the faces in the crowd. He was not a man walking into a town. He was a scout entering hostile territory. They tied Gus outside Peterson's general store. The bell above the door jangled. The store smelled of ground coffee, cured tobacco, and canvas. Mr. Peterson, a small, nervous man, stopped polishing the glass on his candy counter. "Miss Matilda," he said, his eyes flicking to Jonah and back. "Cold one out there." "It is Mr. Peterson. I need a 50-pound sack of flour, 20 pounds of rock salt, 2 crates of 4440 cartridges, and all the carbolic soap you have." That's a big order, Matilda," Peterson stammered, clearly uncomfortable. "I have the money." As she counted out the coins, the bell jangled again. Sheriff Brody stepped in, followed by 2 deputies. Brody was a weak man who wore his badge as a convenience for Shaw, not a protection for the people. "Matilda," Brody said, avoiding her eyes, "folks are unsettled." "Folks are always unsettled, Sheriff. It's your companion." Brody finally looked at Jonah. "Floyd Gentry filed a complaint, assault. Says this man attacked him, unprovoked." "Floyd Gentry is a liar. He was trespassing and he threatened me. Jonah just defended the property." "Jonah?" Brody latched onto the name. "So he has a name. I'm going to need to take him in for questioning." Jonah, who had been examining a display of pickaxe handles, didn't even turn around. "He doesn't speak, Sheriff," Matilda said, her voice hard. "Got his throat torn out by a wolf." "What exactly do you plan to question?" This gave Brody pause. But just then, another man stepped into the store. He was different from the locals. He wore a clean bowler hat and a dark, city-cut suit. His eyes were cold and intelligent. He flicked open his jacket to show a small pink badge pinned to his vest. "Mr. Wade?" Sheriff Brody said, his tone suddenly fawning. This is the situation I was telling you about." "So I see," the man, Wade, said. His voice was sharp, with an Eastern accent. "Pinkerton, I'm in town on behalf of the Union Pacific Railroad. We've had disruptions." Wade walked slowly around Jonah, looking him up and down like a prize bull. Jonah finally turned to face him. The two men stared at each other. The air in the store crackled. "Where did you find him, Mum?" Wade asked Matilda, though he never took his eyes off Jonah. "North Ridge. He was hunting," Matilda lied. "Hunting? Or scouting?" Wade's gaze was penetrating. "We've had surveyors disappear. Stagecoaches from Wells Fargo and Cope has vanished, horses and all. No bodies, no wreckage, just gone." He leaned closer to Jonah. "The local tribes are all on the reservation. They wouldn't dare. But we hear whispers, ghost warriors, a whole army hiding in the Badlands." Jonah remained perfectly still, his expression blank. "This man was half dead from a wolf attack," Matilda said. "He's not a ghost, and he's not an army. He's a drifter." "Is he?" Wade smiled, a thin reptilian gesture. "He has the hands of a worker, but the eyes of a general." He tapped Jonah on the chest. "Who are you, friend?" Jonah just stared. "Sheriff," Wade said, turning away. "I'm requisitioning your office. I have telegraphs to send. As for this one, he's your problem. For now." Wade left the store. Sheriff Brody, clearly shaken by the Pinkertons' presence, turned back to Matilda. "Look, Matilda," he said, lowering his voice. "Shaw's mad. Gentry's arm is a mess. I can't just let this go. You bring the mute in. We'll keep him in a cell overnight to cool off. That's all." "No," Matilda said, loading her sacks. "Don't be a fool. Shaw will get a warrant. He'll get a posse. You can't win this." "Maybe," Matilda said, hefting a sack of flour. "But I'm not starting to lose today." She looked at Jonah. "Let's go." They walked out of the store, the sheriff and his deputies watching, too afraid of the Pinkertons' disapproval and Jonah's silent menace to stop them. As they loaded Gus, Matilda saw Wade watching them from the sheriff's office window, his expression cold and calculating. The ride back was silent. But the world had changed. It wasn't just Shaw anymore. It was the railroad. It was the Pinkertons. It was the U.S. government. All of them. Converging on her small, failing ranch. All of them, looking for the silent man at her side. The sky, which had been a clear, cold blue in Redemption Creek, turned a bruised greenish-gray on their ride home. The wind picked up, carrying the metallic scent of a blizzard. By the time they reached the ranch, the first flakes were falling. Not fat, lazy flakes, but hard, stinging pellets. Within an hour, the world was gone, erased by a blinding wall of white. They were trapped. The blizzard raged for 3 days. The wind shrieked like a banshee, piling snow in 10-foot drifts against the cabin walls. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the small room, the crackle of the fire, and the howl of the storm. The forced proximity was suffocating. Jonah, who had been a creature of the outdoors, now seemed to fill the small cabin. He spent hours by the window, staring into the white void. He was restless, his silence no longer calm, but taut, like a coiled spring. On the 3rd night, the storm reached its peak. The cabin groaned under the weight of the snow and wind. Matilda was cleaning her rifle for the 10th time, her nerves frayed. "They'll come as soon as this breaks," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Wade. Shaw. The sheriff. They won't wait for a warrant this time." Jonah was sitting at her small table. He had been carving a piece of firewood with his Bowie knife. He'd been at it for hours. "They'll kill you," Matilda said, stopping her work. "They think you're some ghost warrior. They'll hang you, and they'll take this ranch from me." She felt a sudden, hot sting in her eyes. My father, he called it Bishop's Folly as a joke. But it's what they all called it. And they were right. It was folly. It's all just dust. Jonah stopped carving. He pushed the piece of wood across the table. Matilda picked it up. It wasn't a random carving. It was a map. It was her valley, her land, but rendered with astonishing detail. She saw the ridges, the canyons, her own cabin. But there was more. He had carved mentioned. They were not surveyors. They were sharpshooters. They were his men. Tokahe gripped the knife. I was scouting his land to find the proof. They ambushed me. 4 of them. You killed them. They did not survive, he whispered. The wolves came. I was too weak. Matilda's world, which had been small and simple, her ranch, her problems, suddenly tilted on its axis. This silent drifter she had saved. He wasn't a drifter. He was a general. A king. How many? She whispered, her voice trembling. How many are with you? Tokahe looked at her, his dark eyes holding the full, terrible weight of his secret. 10,000, he rasped. Women, children, warriors, a nation, and they are waiting for me to return. The blizzard broke on the morning of the 5th day. The silence that followed was heavy, almost as suffocating as the storm itself. The world was a blinding, pristine white. The snow piled in sculpted drifts that made the land unrecognizable. But the calm was a lie. They'll come now, Tokahe rasped. His voice was getting stronger, though it still sounded like tearing cloth. The snow makes us a perfect target. What do we do? Matilda asked. She was no longer just a rancher. She was a conspirator. We prepare. For the next 2 hours they worked. Tokahe was no longer a quiet helper. He was a commander. He had her bring the sacks of flour and grain, barricade the windows, leave only a 6-inch slit for the rifles. He had her bring her father's old, heavy logging chains. The door, he whispered, and showed her how to brace it from the inside in a way that would withstand a battering ram. He took stock of their arsenal, her Winchester 73, her father's old double-barreled shotgun, her Colt pistol, and his own Bowie knife. The roof, he said, pointing up. They will use fire. He had her haul buckets of water from the near-frozen well and soak the blankets from her bed. He climbed onto the roof, moving with his pained gait, and laid the soaked blankets across the shingles near the chimney. It will not stop it, he said, climbing back down. But it will buy time. They didn't have to wait long. Around noon, they appeared on the southern ridge. It wasn't just gentry and a few thugs. It was a posse. Matilda counted 30 men, all heavily armed. Bartholomew Shaw was at their head, alongside the Pinkerton, Wade. Sheriff Brodie and his 2 deputies were there too, looking sick. Matilda Bishop, Shaw's voice boomed across the snow-covered valley. You are harboring a fugitive and a murderer. Send him out, and you will not be harmed. Wade stepped forward. In the name of the United States government and the Union Pacific Railroad, I order you to surrender the man known as Jonah. Matilda looked at Tokahe. He was checking the load in the Winchester. He handed it to her. He kept the shotgun for himself. They want a war, he rasped. We will give them a battle. Matilda! Shaw yelled again. This is your last chance. Matilda poked the barrel of her Winchester through the slit in the barricade. She fired a single shot into the snowbank, just in front of Shaw's horse. The horse reared, and Shaw cursed. The response was immediate. A volley of rifle fire slammed into the cabin. Bullets tore through the wooden walls, sending splinters flying. One shot shattered the glass of the oil lamp on her table. Get down! Tokahe yelled, pulling her to the floor. They have Sharp's rifles. They will shoot through the walls. The siege began. For hours it was a brutal exchange. Shaw's men were spread out, using the rocks and trees for cover. But Tokahe was a tactician. Fire at the man. On the left, he whispered to Matilda, pointing. Not at him. At the snow. Above him. The drift. Matilda, confused, did as he said. She aimed at the heavy cornice of snow on the rock above the gunman. She fired. The bullet hit, and a ton of packed snow cut loose, burying the man in a white avalanche. He didn't get up. 2 men tried to circle around to the barn. Tokahe waited. He let them get close. When they were 30 yards away, in the open, he opened the door just a crack and fired both barrels of the shotgun. The blast echoed like a cannon. The men crumpled. "My God, Jonah." "Tokahe," Matilda stammered. "Reload," he commanded, his voice raw. From the ridge, Wade and Shaw were furious. "He's not just a savage, he's a soldier," Wade screamed. "Bring the fire." They had been waiting. 3 men scrambled forward with torches and bundles of oil-soaked rags. They were using the remaining 2 gunmen for cover. "The fire," Tokahe rasped. I must stop them." "You can't, they'll cut you down." Before she could stop him, he yanked the heavy bar from the door and burst outside. He didn't run at them. He ran at the barn. The gunman, surprised, fired. But he was already moving, using the horse trough as cover. The 3 men with the torches, seeing him, split. 2 ran for the house. 1 ran for the barn. Matilda fired from the window, hitting one of the men running for the house. He fell, his torch extinguishing in the snow. But the other one was too close. He reached the porch and threw his torch onto the blankets on the roof. The wet wool sizzled and smoked, but the oil caught. Fire began to lick at the dry shingles underneath. At the barn, Tokahe met the 3rd man. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Tokahe moved with that same impossible speed, his knife in his hand. The man screamed. It was cut short. Tokahe ran back to the cabin, a dozen bullets chipping the wood around him. He slammed the door, barring it. He was bleeding again, a fresh graze on his arm. "The roof," he said, breathing heavily. They could hear it now, the hungry crackle of the fire overhead. Smoke began to curl down from the rafters. "They have us," Matilda said, her voice hollow. The cabin was her father's legacy. It was all she had. And it was burning. "Gentry!" Shaw roared from outside. "They're boxed in. Smoke 'em out. Put it in the cellar." They heard boots on the porch, the sound of the cellar door being torn open. Floyd Gentry, his arm in a sling, his face contorted in a mask of hate, kicked the door open. He was holding a bundle of lit dynamite. "This is for my arm, you bastard!" he shrieked and threw it into the dark. The explosion was deafening. The floorboards beneath them erupted. The cabin's foundation shattered. Smoke, dust, and the smell of sulfur filled the room. The fire on the roof, fed by the new oxygen, roared to life. "The cellar!" Tokahe rasped, grabbing Matilda. "Now! It is our only chance!" He kicked open the ruined floor hatch. The cellar was a cloud of dust and darkness. "Go!" He pushed her in, and he fell in after her, just as the main roof beam, eaten through by the fire, collapsed into the cabin, sending a shower of embers and flames into the room they had just vacated. They were trapped below ground, in a dark, smoke-filled hole, with 30 armed men outside, waiting for them to burn or suffocate. The cellar was choking. The dust from the explosion was so thick it felt like breathing dirt. Above them, the fire raged, the sound a deafening, terrifying roar. The heat was already intense, baking the earthen walls of the small space. We're going to die in here," Matilda coughed, her eyes streaming. Tokahe put a hand on her shoulder. He was listening, not to the fire, but to something else. He put a finger to his lips, though she couldn't see him in the gloom. "They are waiting," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the inferno. "They think we are dead. We will be soon. We can't breathe. Wait," he rasped. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Shaw's men were cheering. "That's it," she heard Gentry's voice, triumphant. "Burned 'em out. Burned 'em like rats." "Shut up, you fool!" Wade's sharp voice cut through. No one moves until the house is cinders. I want confirmation." Matilda and Tokahe huddled in the corner, a damp rag Matilda had grabbed covering their faces. The smoke was getting thicker. Her lungs burned. And then Tokahe heard it. It was faint at first, a low, rhythmic vibration. It wasn't the fire, it was the ground. It was a deep, rumbling pulse, like a distant thunderstorm. "What is that?" Matilda whispered, feeling it too. Tokahe's eyes, even in the darkness, seemed to glow. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. "My people," he whispered. The sound grew, from a rumble to a tremor. The cheering outside stopped. "What in blazes?" she heard Sheriff Brody stammer. It's an earthquake," one of the deputies yelled. "That's not an earthquake, you idiot," Wade shouted. The panic in his voice was new. That's horses." The sound became a torrent, the sound of 1,000 waterfalls, the sound of the earth itself tearing open. It was the sound of hoofbeats. Not 30, not 100. It was a sound beyond counting. "To the ridge," Wade screamed. "Form a line." Then, a new sound. A high, ululating cry that pierced the roar of the fire and the thunder of the hooves. It was a war cry, and it came from all directions at once. "Tokahe!" Matilda gasped. He put his hand on the ruined cellar hatch. With a surge of adrenaline, he pushed. The burning floorboards above shifted, and he shoved them aside. He climbed out of the hole, emerging like a phoenix from the flames. He stood in the middle of his burning home, framed by fire, covered in soot and blood. Matilda scrambled out after him, shotgun in hand. The sight before them was biblical. Every ridge, every rise, every inch of the snow-covered valley that surrounded the ranch was covered in riders. They were not a rabble. They were an army, arrayed in perfect disciplined lines. They were Lakota and Cheyenne in full war bonnets, ex-soldiers in tattered blue and grey uniforms, Chinese men with broadswords, and miners with rifles. They sat on their horses, silent and unmoving, a living wall of 10,000 people blocking the sky. Shaw, Wade, Gentry, and their entire posse were frozen in the center, their small 30-man force suddenly looking like a child's forgotten toys. Their horses whinnied, terrified. Gentry's jaw was slack, his face the color of ash. Wade had his pistol out, but his hand was shaking. Tokahe stood on his ruined porch and raised his hand. The vast army remained silent. A single rider broke from the line. He was a tall Cheyenne warrior, his face painted, and he led a massive bareback war pony. He rode up to the burning cabin, stopping just before Tokahe. He looked at Tokahe's wounds, at the ruined house, and his eyes filled with a murderous rage. He handed Tokahe the horse's lead rope and a long, eagle-feathered war lance. Tokahe swung himself onto the horse's back. The simple act transformed him. He was no longer Jonah, the silent drifter. He was no longer the wounded man in rags. Straight-backed, lance in hand, he was Tokahe, the commander. He looked down at the men who had come to kill him. "Bartholomew Shaw!" Tokahe's voice roared. The rasp was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant power that carried across the entire valley. "You come to my friend's house. You burn her home. You poison my people's water." Shaw raised his hands. Now hold on," he stammered. This is a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Tokahe declared. Wade stepped forward, his professionalism returning, though his face was pale. "I am an agent of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, representing the United States government. You are an illegal assembly. I order you to disperse." Tokahe looked down at Wade. He laughed. It was a deep, cold sound. "Your government," Tokahe said, "has no authority here. This is not their land." He turned to his army. "This is our Land. 10,000 voices roared as one, a sound so loud it shook the snow from the trees. Shaw's men threw down their rifles. Several, including Sheriff Brody, fell to their knees. Gentry, in a fit of pure, mindless panic, raised his pistol and fired at Tokahe. The shot went wide. Before he could fire again, an arrow, then 3, then a dozen, flew from the silent ranks. Gentry looked down, a cluster of fletchings buried in his chest. He fell from his saddle, dead before he hit the snow. A terrible silence fell again. Tokahe looked at Shaw and Wade, his eyes flat. "The next move," he said, "is yours." The ashes of Matilda's cabin smoked in the bitter cold. The sun was beginning to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and violet. The vast, silent army of the Anunkasha held the ridges, their patience absolute. Bartholomew Shaw, the man who had owned the valley, was now a prisoner in it. He sat on his horse, shaking, his eyes darting between Tokahe and the thousands of warriors watching him. Wade the Pinkerton was standing, his face a mask of cold fury and calculation. He knew he was witnessing a power shift that would change the territory forever. Tokahe did not order a massacre. He was, as he had tried to tell Matilda, a builder. He rode his horse up to Shaw until they were knee to knee. "You love paper," Tokahe said, his voice now a low, commanding rasp. "You love your bank drafts and your deeds," he gestured. His Cheyenne second-in-command produced a stack of papers and a fountain pen from a saddlebag. "This is Bishop's Folly," Tokahe said. "It is hers, but you wanted it," he nudged Shaw. "You will buy it." "Buy it," Shaw stammered. It's burned." "You will pay Matilda Bishop $20,000 in drafts on the First National Bank of Denver for her burned land, for her trouble. 20,000. That's robbery." Tokahe's eyes hardened. "What you did to my spring was murder. I am offering you commerce." "Right," Wade stepped forward. "This is extortion. This is illegal." Tokahe's second-in-command silently drew a long knife. Wade stopped talking. Shivering, Shaw wrote out the bank draft, his signature a barely legible scrawl. He handed it to Tokahe, who passed it to Matilda. She looked at the paper. It was an impossible sum, more money than she had ever dreamed of. "Now," Tokahe said, turning to Wade, "you will also write. You are a man of reports." "What report?" Wade asked stiffly. "Your report will say that the ghosts are real. It will say that the land north of Redemption Creek is the sovereign territory of the Anunkasha. It will say that any railroad surveyor or U.S. soldier who crosses that line will be considered an act of war." "This is insurrection," Wade hissed. "This is negotiation," Tokahe corrected. "You tell your bosses in Washington and Omaha that we hold the high passes, we hold the water, and we have 10,000 rifles. You will build your railroad south, around us, or not at all." Wade stared at Tokahe. He was a practical man. He had seen the power. He knew when a game was lost. He gave a sharp, curt nod. "They will hear of you. They will." Tokahe agreed. He looked at Shaw. "You will leave this valley. You and your men. You will ride east. If you are seen here after sunrise, my warriors will
Hunt. You. For sport. Shaw, Brodie, and the rest of Shaw's terrified posse didn't need to be told twice. They turned their horses and
rode, scrambling up the eastern pass, not once looking back. Only Wade remained. He meticulously folded his report, placed it in his coat, and gave a formal bow to Tokahe. "You've made your point, sir." He mounted his horse and rode away, a defeated ambassador from a distant, suddenly powerless empire. As dusk settled, the great army began to melt away. In a silence as profound as their arrival, the thousands of riders turned and disappeared back into the high canyons, vanishing into the landscape like a mirage. Soon, it was just Tokahe and Matilda, standing in the smoking ruins of her life. The cold was setting in. Tokahe dismounted, his pained gait returning now that the battle was over. He stood before her, no longer a general, just a man. "Your home is gone," he rasped, the power fading from his voice. "Because of me." Matilda looked at the ashes, then at the bank draft, clutched in her hand. "It was just a house," she said. It was a folly, just like my father said." "No," Tokahe said. "It was a home, and you made it a sanctuary." He looked at his own hands. "I am a leader. I build a nation, but I have no home, only a fortress." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "A nation needs more than a warrior. It needs heart. It needs a bridge. Someone who knows the world we are fighting and the world we are building." He held out his hand. It was not a command. It was an invitation. "Come with me, Matilda Bishop. Help me build a nation." Matilda looked at the ashes of her past. She looked at the vast, cold, empty valley, now free of Shaw's menace. And she looked at this impossible man, this silent drifter who commanded armies, this wounded warrior who spoke of building a home. She had saved him from wolves. But he had, in the end, saved her from a life of quiet desperation. She did not know what lay in the high Badlands. She did not know if she would be a queen, a partner, or a prisoner. But she knew that for the first time in her life, she was not afraid. Matilda Bishop, the lone woman of Bishop's Folly, put her hand in his. "Show me the way," she said. Out of the wind-scarred, lonely plains of Wyoming, a single act of compassion lit a fire that would reshape the future of the entire territory. When Matilda Bishop made the choice to save a silent, broken stranger from the wolves, she was simply trying to save one life. She had no idea she was intervening in a secret war, shielding the one man who held the fate of thousands in his hands. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that our true destiny is often found not in the paths we plan, but in the ones we are brave enough to walk by chance. She thought her life was defined by the dust and debt of her father's failed ranch, but her real purpose was so much greater. She saved a man she called Jonah, a silent drifter, never imagining she was protecting Tokahe, the secret general of 10,000 warriors and the founder of a new nation. Their story teaches us that true strength isn't always loud and defiant. Sometimes it's the quiet, stubborn courage to do what is right, to protect the fallen, and to see the hero hidden beneath the rags. Thank you so much for joining us for this incredible journey. If you were on the edge of your seat as this story unfolded, and if you believe in the power of hidden strength and unexpected heroes, please help our channel grow. We want to hear from you. What was the most powerful moment in this story for you? Was it the shocking reveal of Tokahe's identity? The thunderous arrival of his 10,000 warrior army? Or was it the final, tense negotiation in the ashes of the cabin. Let us know your favorite part in the comments below.